Anya's fingers trembled as she polished the silver clasp on her stepsister's cloak. The metal was cold, a stark contrast to the nervous heat flushing her own skin. Outside the carriage window, the forests of the northern clans blurred into a tapestry of deep green and twilight gray. They were getting closer. To the moon festival. To him. "Harder, you useless girl!" Her stepmother, Isolde, snapped from the plush seat opposite. Her voice was as sharp as a shard of ice. "Do you want Serafina to present herself to the Alpha King looking like she was dressed by a scullery maid?" Anya flinched, ducking her head and rubbing the clasp with more vigor. Useless. The word had been branded onto her soul since her father's death, since Isolde had become the mistress of their dwindling house. Anya was an omega, her wolf a faint, sleeping whisper within her, a shameful secret in a world that prized strength above all else. She was a flaw in their bloodline, a stain her stepmother was determined to polish away into invisibility. "It is fine, mother," Serafina said, her voice a soft, melodic counterpoint to Isolde's grating tone. She placed a gentle hand over Anya's. "It shines beautifully." "Thank you, Anya." Anya looked up, meeting her stepsister's kind blue eyes. Serafina was everything Anya was not. Tall, radiant, with a mane of golden hair and the confident grace of a born beta. Soon to be an alpha's mate. She was the family's hope, their ticket back to the respect and status they had lost. And despite the chasm between them, she had never been cruel. That kindness in some ways was worse than Isolde's disdain. It was a constant, gentle reminder of her own inadequacy. Isolde sniffed, her gaze sweeping over Anya with unconcealed disgust. "Kindness will not win us a royal alliance, Serafina. Power respects power. And you," she jabbed a finger toward Anya, "will remember your place tonight. You are to remain at the back. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not look anyone of high station in the eye. Your purpose is to serve your sister and then disappear. Am I understood?" "Yes, stepmother," Anya murmured, her eyes fixed on the velvet floor of the carriage. Disappear. She was good at that. She had spent a decade perfecting the art of fading into the background, of making herself small and quiet so as not to draw attention to her family's shame. Her own gift, if it could be called that, was as quiet and useless as her wolf. A strange warmth in her hands, a deep empathy that could soothe a headache with a touch, or calm a startled animal with a soft word. In a society of warriors and alphas, the ability to ease pain was seen as a weak, servile trait. It was an omega's talent, fit for the nursery or the infirmary, not the great hall of the Alpha King. The carriage lurched to a halt. The air outside, once filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, was now thick with the potent aroma of hundreds of werewolves gathered in one place. Power, ambition, and nervous energy crackled like lightning. Muffled sounds of music and conversation bled through the carriage walls. "We are here," Isolde announced, her voice trembling with a mixture of avarice and anxiety. She straightened Serafina's cloak one last time, her eyes gleaming. "This is the night that changes everything for us, daughter. The Shadow King is here to choose a mate. And it will be you. The Shadow King. King Malachi." Anya's blood ran cold. Even in their remote province, tales of the Alpha King were whispered like ghost stories to frighten pups. They said he was a monster, scarred and broken. They said he had clawed his way to the throne over the body of his own father. They said a dark curse ran through his veins, making his touch a poison and his temper a wildfire. No she-wolf had ever warmed his bed for more than a night, and none had ever been asked to stay. Now, for reasons no one understood, he had declared he would take a mate at this moon festival, a political necessity, the rumors claimed, to solidify his reign. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified not for Serafina, who was strong and capable, but for herself. A gathering of such immense power was like a storm to her senses. The raw emotions of so many dominant wolves would be a deafening roar in her mind. Her only goal was to remain unseen, unheard, and untouched. To survive the night. The carriage door opened, and a footman offered a hand. Isolde descended first, a picture of aristocratic hauteur. Serafina followed, a collective gasp rippling through the nearby crowd as she stepped into the torchlight, a vision of golden beauty. Anya slipped out last, a gray shadow in their wake. She kept her head down, her worn gray dress blending with the cobblestones, and focused on the single task of carrying Serafina's small reticule. She was a ghost at the feast, and that was exactly how she needed to remain. The great hall of the northern pack was a cavern of noise and light. Torches flickered in wrought iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on ancient tapestries that depicted legendary hunts and epic battles. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, mulled wine, and the cloying sweetness of expensive perfumes worn to mask the feral musk of anticipation. Hundreds of wolves, dressed in their finest silks and velvets, mingled and postured, their eyes constantly scanning the room for opportunity, for rivalry, for a sign of the king. Anya trailed behind Isolde and Serafina, her senses overwhelmed. The emotional energy in the hall was a physical force, a chaotic symphony of pride, lust, fear, and ambition that pressed in on her from all sides. It made her head ache, and her hands tremble. She clutched the small bag in her hands like a lifeline, focusing on its smooth texture to ground herself. "There," Isolde hissed, giving Serafina a subtle nudge. "Lord Garrick. The king's uncle. Go. Be charming." Serafina gave Anya a fleeting, apologetic glance before gliding gracefully into the crowd, her smile as bright and practiced as a courtier's. Anya watched her go, a familiar pang of envy and resignation twisting in her gut. They were two sides of a coin, her sister and her. One minted in gold, the other in lead. Left alone for a moment, Anya instinctively retreated, finding a small alcove behind a thick pillar where the shadows were deepest. From here, she could observe without being observed. She watched the high-born ladies laugh behind their fans, their eyes sharp and calculating. She saw the powerful alphas, their chests puffed out, circling each other like bulls in a pen. It was a beautiful, brutal dance of power, and she was not welcome on the floor. Then a hush fell over the hall. It started at the great oaken doors and spread like a wave, silencing the music, stilling the chatter. The air grew heavy, charged with a new kind of energy. Not ambition, but pure, primal fear. He had arrived. King Malachi entered the hall, and it felt as if the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. He was not flanked by a grand entourage, only by a single, grim-faced warrior who had to be his beta, Darian. But the king needed no one else. His presence alone consumed the space. He was taller than any wolf Anya had ever seen, broad-shouldered and clad in severe black leather that seemed to absorb the torchlight. His hair was the color of a moonless night, and it fell over a face that was both brutally handsome and terrifyingly marred. A network of jagged, silver scars traced a path from his temple, across his left eye, and down to his jawline. They were not the clean scars of a warrior's duel. They were vicious, chaotic, as if he had been mauled by some unspeakable beast. But it was his eyes that held the true terror. They were a pale, icy gray, and they swept over the assembled crowd with a chilling emptiness. There was no warmth in them, no curiosity, only a profound and dangerous stillness. This was not a king seeking a queen. This was a predator scanning a field of prey. The stories were true, Anya thought, her heart lodged in her throat. He was broken. He was a walking storm, and the curse they whispered about felt real, a palpable aura of pain and rage that radiated from him. Her own empathic sense recoiled from it, a silent scream in her soul. The agony clinging to him was ancient and absolute. He moved toward the throne set upon a dais at the far end of the hall, his steps measured and silent. The sea of werewolves parted before him, heads bowed in deference and fear. No one dared to meet his gaze. Isolde reappeared at Anya's side, her fingers digging into Anya's arm like talons. "He is here," she breathed, her voice tight with excitement. "Now is the time. When he passes, Serafina will be perfectly positioned." Isolde dragged Anya from the safety of her alcove, pulling her back toward the main thoroughfare. Anya stumbled, her worn slippers struggling for purchase on the polished stone. They stopped near where Serafina stood talking with Lord Garrick, her sister's face pale but composed. The king was getting closer. The oppressive weight of his presence grew with every step. Anya could feel the pain rolling off him in waves, a cold fire that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She wanted to run, to hide, to do anything but be this close to the source of that immense suffering. "Get ready," Isolde whispered, her eyes fixed on the approaching monarch. The king's path would take him directly past their small group. Serafina took a small, preparatory breath, her shoulders straightening. This was the moment their entire family had gambled on. But as the king drew level with them, his cold gaze did not fall on the radiant Serafina. For a fleeting, terrifying second, it swept past her and landed directly on Anya. It was only for an instant, but it was enough to stop her breath. It felt like being seen by a god of death. She saw a flicker of something in those icy depths. Not interest, but a flash of raw, untamed agony. It was a look of such profound torment that it struck a chord of empathy so deep within her, it was a physical blow. The king's gaze moved on, but the moment had unnerved her. Her balance, already precarious, faltered. And then Isolde moved. Seeing her chance to push Serafina into the king's direct line of sight, she shoved. But it was not Serafina she pushed. It was Anya. The shove was not hard, but it was brutally efficient. Isolde's hand on her back was a firm, dismissive thrust, meant to move her out of the way, to clear the stage for the star. But Anya was already off balance, her mind reeling from the king's gaze. The unexpected force sent her stumbling forward, out of the line of courtiers and directly into the open space cleared for the king. Anya's worn slipper caught on the edge of a flagstone. A small, horrified gasp escaped her lips as she pitched forward. Time seemed to slow. She saw the shocked face of her stepsister, the triumphant sneer on Isolde's lips, and the cold, hard stone floor rushing up to meet her. She threw her hands out to break her fall, the little reticule flying from her grasp. She landed in a graceless heap of gray wool, not 2 feet from the Alpha King's black leather boots. Silence, the entire hall, already quiet, seemed to hold its collective breath. The only sound was the crackle of the torches on the walls. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Anya. To be made a spectacle of, to fall at the feet of the one man everyone feared more than death itself, it was a nightmare made real. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. A dark shadow fell over her. He had stopped. Slowly, terrified of what she would see, Anya lifted her head. King Malachi stood over her, his expression unreadable, carved from stone. His scarred face was a mask of cold indifference, but his eyes, those pale glacial eyes, were fixed on her. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible, crushing weight. She could feel the stares of hundreds of wolves on her back, could feel their scorn, their pity, their morbid curiosity. She expected fury. A roar of anger at the disruption, at the audacity of a lowly Omega interrupting his path. She expected to be dismissed, or worse, punished. Her entire body tensed for the blow, verbal or physical. Her hand, which she had flung out to catch herself, lay on the floor near the toe of his boot. As she scrambled to pull it back, To make herself smaller, her fingertips brushed against the worn leather. It was the barest of touches, skin against leather, but a jolt went through her. It was not a spark of a mate bond, nothing so romantic or fated. It was a sudden, dizzying influx of his pain, a tidal wave of it, so potent it almost made her black out. But through her skin, she felt her own strange gift respond instinctively. A tiny, quiet pulse of warmth, of soothing calm, left her and was absorbed by the boot. It was a drop of fresh water in a burning desert, utterly insignificant. Yet, it had happened. And he felt it. The king's stone-cold expression fractured. A flicker of something, shock, confusion, disbelief, crossed his features. His gaze dropped from her face to her hand, then back up. The emptiness in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity that was somehow more terrifying. He had been living in a state of constant, grinding agony for years, a relentless, internal fire that was the hallmark of his family's curse. It was his constant companion, the background noise to his every thought, his every breath. He had learned to function with it, to rule with it, to use it to fuel his fearsome reputation. Over time, he had forgotten what even a moment's peace felt like. Until now. For the first time in a decade, for a single, miraculous heartbeat, the fire inside him did not burn. It did not vanish, but it receded. The sharp edges of his torment were momentarily smoothed, the roaring inferno banked to a dull, manageable glow. It was the most profound relief he had ever known, and it had come from the accidental touch of a terrified girl in a gray dress. Before anyone could react, before Isolde could hiss at Anya to get up, before Lord Garrick could step forward to apologize for the disturbance, the king moved. He bent down, not with anger, but with a slow, deliberate grace that stunned the onlookers. He ignored the gasps, the frantic whispers that erupted around the hall. His focus was entirely on the small, trembling wolf at his feet. He reached out a gloved hand. Anya flinched, certain he meant to strike her or drag her away. But his hand was not rough. It was offered, palm up, in a clear invitation. Her mind went blank. This was impossible. This was not happening. "On your feet," he commanded. His voice was a low, rough baritone, like stones grinding together. It was not kind, but it was not cruel either. It was a simple statement of fact. Hesitantly, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely control them, she placed her hand in his. His leather glove was cool against her skin, but she could feel the immense, suppressed power thrumming beneath it. As he closed his fingers around hers, the sensation happened again. That quiet pulse of soothing warmth flowed from her, and she felt the tremor of shock that went through him in response. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, his grip firm and inescapable. He did not let go. He stood there, in the center of the silent great hall, holding the hand of a nameless Omega, his piercing gaze searching her face as if trying to unravel a puzzle he had never encountered before. He looked from her to Isolde and Serafina, his eyes now colder than a winter storm. He saw the fury on the older woman's face and the stunned confusion on the younger's. He understood the dynamics of the scene in an instant. This girl had not thrown herself at his feet. She had been pushed. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low but carrying in the unnatural silence. Anya," she stammered, unable to look away from his scarred face. Now that she was closer, she saw the pain etched into the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was not a monster. He was a man in a cage of his own suffering. He gave a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the court. "Anya," he repeated, the name a strange sound on his lips. Then, without another word, without releasing her hand, he resumed his walk toward the throne, pulling her along with him. The crowd parted, their faces a mixture of disbelief and horror. The Alpha King, the cursed Shadow King, had taken the hand of a lowly, disgraced Omega before all, and was leading her through the heart of his court as if she belonged there. Anya could only stumble along in his wake, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer invisible. She was caught in the eye of the storm, and she had no idea if it would save her or tear her apart. The walk to the dais was the longest of Anya's life. Every step felt like a year, every stare a physical blow. She kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the stone floor, but she could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. She heard the whispers erupt behind them, a sibilant rush of scandal and speculation. She could feel the burning hatred of her stepmother from across the room and the bewildered pity of Seraphina. King Malachi's grip on her hand never wavered. It was a manacle, an anchor. She was his prisoner, towed along beside him, a strange and unexpected prize. The heat from his body was intense, a furnace of suppressed power. And yet, the closer she was, the more she felt that deep, resonating hum of his pain. It was a constant thrum beneath his skin, a caged beast rattling its bars, and her own strange magic, her useless little gift, seemed to answer it, a soft, involuntary trickle of comfort flowing from her to him. He reached the throne, a massive thing of dark wood and unadorned iron, and finally released her hand. The sudden absence of his touch left her skin feeling cold and her senses strangely bereft. He sat, his movements economical and precise, and gestured to the steps at the foot of the throne. "Here," he commanded. It was not a request. Anya sank onto the top step, tucking her worn gray dress around her ankles, trying to make herself as small as possible. From this vantage point, she could see the entire hall laid out before her. She saw Lord Garrick approaching, his face a thunderous mask of controlled fury. She saw Isolde, pale with rage, being held back by a concerned Seraphina. She had ruined everything, their one chance at glory, and she had stumbled her way into the center of it, a weed in a royal garden. "Your Majesty," Lord Garrick said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he bowed stiffly before the throne. "1,000 pardons for the interruption. The girl is clearly a clumsy fool. Allow me to have her removed. She will be punished for her insolence." Anya's breath hitched. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the king's agreement. "No," Malachi said. The word was flat, absolute. It cut through Garrick's obsequious tone like a blade. "She will stay." Garrick's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your Majesty? She is an Omega, from a disgraced house. She has no place here." "She has the place I give her," Malachi retorted, his voice dropping to a near growl. "She is now a member of my personal household. She will be my attendant. See to it that she is given quarters near my own." The entire court seemed to sway with the shock of his pronouncement. An attendant? A disgraced Omega as the king's personal attendant? It was unheard of. It was an insult to every high-born lady in the room who had hoped to catch his eye. Anya felt a wave of nausea, quarters near his own. The words echoed in the cavernous hall, sealing her fate. Lord Garrick looked as if he had been slapped. But the alliances. The purpose of this festival. You were to choose a mate, a strong alpha female to be your queen. "I am aware of the festival's purpose, Uncle," Malachi said, his icy gaze daring Garrick to argue further. "And I will consider the candidates. In the meantime, this one will serve me. Is that a problem?" The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Garrick bowed again, his back rigid with fury. "As you command, my king." He shot Anya a look of pure venom before turning and stalking back into the crowd. The festival continued, but the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. The music seemed strained, the laughter forced. Everyone's attention was divided between their own ambitions and the strange, silent girl now sitting at the feet of the terrifying king. Anya did not move. She felt trapped, a specimen under glass. Malachi did not speak to her again for the rest of the evening. He sat on his throne, a brooding, silent statue, while various alphas and their daughters were presented to him. He acknowledged them with a curt nod, his face an unreadable mask, his eyes empty. He did not touch any of them. Anya watched Serafina be presented. Her stepsister was flawless, her bow perfect, her words respectful. The king looked at her, and for a moment, Anya saw a flicker of something. Not interest, but a clinical assessment. He was judging her strength, her bloodline. But his gaze was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. He dismissed her with the same cool nod he gave everyone else. The moment was a failure. Isolde's great plan had come to nothing, and it was all Anya's fault. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the king rose. The hall fell silent once more. "The festivities are concluded for the night," he announced, his voice echoing in the rafters. "We depart for the capital at dawn." His gaze fell on Anya. "You will be ready." He turned and strode from the hall without a backward glance. His beta, Darian, gave Anya a quick, unreadable look before following him. Anya was left alone on the steps, the focus of every resentful and curious stare. She was no longer Anya, the useless Omega. She was the king's attendant, the king's mystery. She had been plucked from obscurity and thrust into the heart of power, and she was certain it was not a rescue, but the beginning of a far worse punishment. The king's fortress was not a castle. It was a scar on the landscape. Carved from the black rock of a dormant volcano, it loomed over the capital city, a monument to brutal strength and isolation. There were no decorative banners, no welcoming gardens. Only sheer dark walls, narrow windows like arrow slits, and a single iron-bound gate. It was called the Shadow Spire, and it was a perfect reflection of its master. Anya had spent the journey in a separate carriage, a silent, jolting ride that gave her far too much time to think. She had not seen the king since he had left the Great Hall. She had been collected by a stern-faced guard and told to pack her meager belongings, a task that took less than 5 minutes. She had not been allowed to say goodbye to Serafina. Now she was being led through cold, echoing corridors by a silent servant. The air inside the spire was still and heavy, smelling of cold stone, old iron, and something else. A faint, metallic scent, like ozone after a lightning strike. It was the smell of raw, contained power. Her quarters were not the dungeon cell she had expected. They were a small but clean suite of rooms, a bedroom, a sitting area, and a private bathing chamber. The furnishings were sparse but well-made, all dark wood and gray wool. It was more luxury than she had ever known, but it felt like a cage. A large barred window looked out not over the city, but onto a bleak, stone-walled internal courtyard. There was no escape. "The king requires your presence in his study," the servant said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Now." Anya's stomach twisted into a knot. She followed the servant through another series of identical, grim corridors until they reached a set of massive, iron-studded doors. The servant knocked once, then opened the door and gestured for Anya to enter before retreating and pulling the door shut behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing like a death knell. The study was a vast, circular room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves groaning under the weight of countless books and scrolls. A fire roared in a cavernous hearth, casting flickering light on maps and charts spread across a massive wooden table. King Malachi stood at the far side of the room, his back to her, staring out a large, arched window at the sprawling city below. He did not turn as she entered. "Come here," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the large space. Anya's feet felt like lead, but she forced herself to obey, her slippers making no sound on the thick, dark carpets. She stopped a few paces behind him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop their shaking. "Why did you fall?" he asked, still not looking at her. The question surprised her. I was pushed, Your Majesty." The words came out in a whisper. He finally turned, his scarred face illuminated by the firelight. The shadows played across the silvered tracks of his old wounds, making them seem deeper, more severe. "By your stepmother." It was not a question. Anya swallowed and nodded. "She wanted me to notice your sister," he stated. Again, she could only nod, amazed by his perception. He took a step closer, and her breath caught in her throat. The sheer physical power of him was overwhelming. He was a force of nature, a living storm. And the pain. It was stronger here, in his private space. A constant, low-level thrum of agony that clung to him like a shroud. "When you touched me," he began, his voice low and intense, his gaze boring into her. "What did you feel?" Her mind raced. How could she answer that? How could she explain her strange, useless gift? I do not know what you mean, my king." A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Do not lie to me." I felt it. Quiet. The pain lessened. "I have not felt that since I was a boy." "What did you do?" He was too close, his intensity too much. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she was trapped. "I did nothing," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It is just something that happens sometimes. A warmth. My mother had it. It is an omega trait. It is useless." "Useless?" He let out a short, harsh laugh devoid of any humor. He raised his left hand, pulling off the black leather glove. Anya gasped. His hand was as scarred as his face, the skin a mangled tapestry of silver and pink. But that was not what shocked her. A faint, dark tremor was running through his fingers, making them twitch and spasm uncontrollably. It was a physical manifestation of the curse she could sense within him. "This," he said, his voice tight with self-loathing, "is my constant companion. It is a fire in my blood, a poison in my bones. It will, in time, drive me mad and then kill me, just as it did my father, and his father before him. There is no cure. There is only this." He held his trembling hand out to her. It was not a command, but a test. Fear warred with the deep, aching empathy that was the core of her being. She saw not the fearsome king, but a man in unimaginable pain, offering her a glimpse of his deepest shame. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out. Her small, pale hand looked fragile and insignificant next to his scarred, trembling one. She took a shuddering breath and laid her palm over the back of his hand. The effect was instantaneous. The violent tremors ceased. Under her touch, his hand became perfectly still. A deep, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, a sound of such profound relief that it broke her heart. She could feel the curse fighting back, a cold, vicious thing coiling in the depths of his soul. But her warmth, her quiet gift, held it at bay. It was like cupping her hands around a flickering candle in a hurricane, a fragile but determined defense. He stared down at their joined hands, his expression one of utter disbelief. He had sought cures from the world's greatest mages, healers, and priests. He had bathed in sacred waters and swallowed foul potions. Nothing had ever worked. Nothing had ever brought him a moment's peace, until a disgraced Omega had stumbled at his feet. "You will not leave my side," he said, his voice raw with an emotion she could not name. He finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the emptiness was gone. In its place was a desperate, terrifying hope. "You are the first relief I have known in a decade. You will stay with me. You will be my shadow. That is your purpose now." He was not offering her a position, he was claiming her. She was not his attendant. She was his remedy. A living medicine to be kept close at hand. And as she stood there, her hand still covering his, feeling the beast within him quieted for a moment, she knew that her cage had just become much, much smaller. The days that followed blurred into a strange, suffocating routine. Anya was, as the king had commanded, his shadow. She was moved into the suite of rooms adjoining his own, connected by a private, unlocked door. She ate her meals in his study as he worked. She stood silently in the corner of the throne room during his audiences. She walked the battlements with him during his restless, prowling nights. He rarely spoke to her, but he was always near her. Often, he would simply command her to sit beside him while he read, his hand resting on the arm of his chair, his little finger just brushing against her sleeve. That small point of contact seemed to be enough to keep the worst of the tremors at bay, to quiet the roaring fire in his blood to a manageable heat. Anya learned to read the subtle signs of his suffering, the tightening of his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the way his knuckles would turn white as he gripped a quill. In those moments, she would find an excuse to be closer, to brush her hand against his as she offered him a cup of tea, or to adjust the furs on his chair. Each time she would feel the tension bleed out of him, and he would give her a quick, grateful glance from those haunted gray eyes. The court was a viper's nest of rumor and resentment. Anya was the Omega Witch, the king's pet. The high-born ladies who had been presented at the festival viewed her with open hostility. Lord Garrick, in particular, made his displeasure known. He never addressed her directly, but he would make cutting remarks in her hearing about the dangers of putting faith in low-born charlatans. One afternoon, as Anya was organizing scrolls in the study, Garrick entered without being announced. Malachi was in a meeting with his war council, leaving them briefly alone. "Enjoying your newfound status, little stray?" Garrick purred, his voice slick with menace. He circled her like a predator. "You have the king bewitched." "A parlor trick, I'm sure. But tricks grow stale." Anya kept her eyes on the scroll in her hands. "I do not know what you mean, my lord." "Oh, I think you do," he said, stopping directly in front of her. "The king is unwell. He has been for years, a weakness of the blood. He grasps at any hope, no matter how false. But he needs a strong queen, a political match that will secure his borders. He does not need a pet Omega to soothe his fevers. Your presence here threatens the stability of the kingdom." "I only do as the king commands," she whispered, her heart hammering. "And his commands are clouded," Garrick hissed, leaning closer. "He sees a cure where there is only a distraction. Mark my words, girl, when he realizes you cannot save him, he will cast you aside, and I will be there to make sure you land on the stones." He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving Anya trembling. She knew he was right about one thing. She was not a cure. She was a temporary balm, a brief respite. She was only delaying the inevitable. The curse was a deeply rooted poison, and her simple gift was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. What would happen when he finally understood that? Her fears were realized later that week. The king was in a foul mood, the pain clearly rising beyond what her passive proximity could soothe. He paced the study like a caged wolf, his hands clenched into fists, the tremors racking his entire body. He had dismissed his guards, leaving only Anya. "It is getting worse," he growled, his voice strained. He slammed a fist on the great oak table, making the inkwells jump. "Your little trick is failing." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This was it. This was the moment Garrick had predicted. "Perhaps, if I—" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "What?" he snarled, turning on her. His eyes were wild, the pupils dilated with pain. "What can you possibly do?" Instead of cowering, an instinct she did not know she possessed rose to the surface. It was not courage, but a deep, overwhelming wave of empathy for his suffering. She could not bear to see him in such torment. She walked toward him, her steps slow but steady. "Your Majesty," she said softly, her voice shaking but clear. "Your hand." He stared at her, his chest heaving, a battle raging in his eyes between suspicion and desperation. Finally, with a shuddering groan, he held out his trembling, scarred hand. This time, she did not just touch him. She laced her fingers through his, holding his hand firmly in both of hers. She closed her eyes and focused, not just on the physical touch, but on the raging beast of a curse inside him. She did not try to fight it. She simply accepted it. She enveloped it in her own quiet stillness, offering it a place of peace. She poured all of her energy, all of her empathy, into the touch. It was more than she had ever done before. She felt the warmth leave her in a flood, leaving her feeling dizzy and drained, but she held on. Malachi gasped. The tremors stopped completely. The frantic, pained energy radiating from him calmed. He stared at their joined hands, then at her pale, determined face. He had been lashing out, pushing her away, convinced the fleeting relief was gone forever. But she had walked into the fire for him, and with a simple, courageous act, she had doused the flames. "How?" he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "I do not know," she answered honestly, opening her eyes. "I just listen to the pain. And I ask it to be quiet for a little while." In that moment, something shifted between them. He was no longer just her king, her captor. And she was no longer just his remedy. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not an omega, not a servant, but the resilient, brave woman who was the only person in the world who did not fear his brokenness. He lifted his other hand, his touch hesitant, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers were steady. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender it made her heart skip a beat. The mate pull, a feeling he had ruthlessly suppressed since the moment he first saw her, flared to life, a deep, resonant hum in his soul. It was no longer just a pull of fate, it was a pull of genuine, burgeoning admiration. But it terrified him. To bind her to him, to his curse, would be to condemn her to death. And that, he was beginning to realize, was a price he was no longer willing to pay. The newfound intimacy was a fragile, unspoken thing. Malachi began to talk to her, not just about his pain, but about his kingdom, his fears for his people, the weight of the crown. He would read to her in the evenings from his ancient books, his deep voice a soothing rumble in the quiet of the study. Anya, in turn, found her own voice. She told him stories from her childhood, simple tales her mother used to share, weaving narratives of hope and resilience that seemed to captivate him. She was no longer just a living balm. She was becoming his confidant, the only soul in his dark fortress who saw the man and not the monster. The change was not lost on the court. Lord Garrick's animosity grew colder and more calculating. He saw his influence over his nephew waning, replaced by the quiet counsel of an Omega. He knew he had to act. His opportunity came during the week of the blood moon, a time when all magic, light and dark, was amplified. Malachi's curse always grew more violent, more uncontrollable during this period. He would lock himself away in the deepest chambers of the spire, refusing all contact, to ride out the storm alone. This time, however, was different. "You will stay," he had told Anya, his voice grim. "Your presence, it may help." Anya was terrified, but she nodded her assent. She would not abandon him. Not now. Garrick's plan was simple and cruel. He approached Anya on the eve of the blood moon, his face a mask of false concern. "The king is not himself during this time," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "The curse takes him. He becomes something else, a beast. For your own safety, you must know of the hidden passage in his chambers. If he becomes too violent, you must use it to escape." He described a secret door behind a tapestry, leading to the outer corridors. Anya's blood ran cold at the description of a beast, but she was suspicious of Garrick's sudden concern for her welfare. "The king has ordered me to stay," she said, her chin held high. "Foolish girl," Garrick sneered, his mask slipping. "Your loyalty will be your death. When the monster wears his skin, it will not recognize you." He left her with that chilling thought hanging in the air. That night, the atmosphere in the king's chambers was electric with dread. Malachi was pale, his skin clammy with sweat. The tremors were back with a vengeance, so violent his teeth chattered. He sat in a large, reinforced chair in the center of the room, his hands gripping the arms so tightly the wood groaned. "Get back," he ordered Anya, his voice a strangled gasp. "Stay by the door." Anya obeyed, her heart pounding. The pain rolling off him was a physical entity, a suffocating blanket of pure agony. It was far beyond anything her touch could soothe. As the blood moon reached its zenith, its crimson light filtering through the high window, a terrible change began. A guttural roar ripped from Malachi's throat, a sound that was not human. His body convulsed, his bones cracking and shifting with sickening snaps. Dark, shadowy tendrils erupted from his skin, coiling around him like living smoke. His form elongated, his muscles bunching and twisting into unnatural shapes. His clothes shredded as he grew, his skin darkening to the color of bruised night. The silver scars on his face and body began to glow with a malevolent internal light. He was not shifting into a wolf. He was transforming into the source of the whispers, the truth behind the legends. A monster. The creature that stood in his place was a nightmare of shadow and claw. It was vaguely wolf-like in its shape, but larger, leaner, its limbs too long, its movements unnervingly fluid. It had no fur, only shifting, semi-solid darkness that seemed to writhe and hiss. Its eyes were two burning embers of pure, unadulterated rage and pain. It threw its head back and let out a howl of pure agony that shook the very stones of the fortress. This was his curse. The bloodline affliction was not just a sickness, it was a possession, a monstrous entity that periodically consumed him. The beast's burning eyes swept the room and fixed on her. There was no recognition in them, no hint of the man she knew. There was only hunger and hate. It took a stalking step toward her, a low growl rumbling in its shadowy chest. Anya was frozen with a terror so absolute it stole the air from her lungs. Garrick's words echoed in her mind. "The monster will not recognize you." The secret passage was behind the tapestry to her left. Safety was only a few feet away. She could run. She could escape. No one would blame her. The beast took another step, its claws scraping on the stone floor. It was the sound of death approaching. But as she looked into those burning eyes, she saw past the rage. Deep, deep within the inferno, she saw a flicker of Malachi's soul, trapped and screaming. He was in there, buried beneath layers of ancient pain and dark magic. And he was alone. He had faced this horror alone his entire life. He had locked himself away, endured this agony in solitude to protect others from the monster he was forced to become. Her fear did not vanish, but something else rose to meet it. Her fierce, defiant empathy. She would not leave him. She would not let him be alone in the dark. Ignoring the pounding of her heart, ignoring every instinct that screamed at her to flee, Anya took a small, deliberate step toward the monster. The shadow beast paused, its head cocked at her unexpected movement. A confused, guttural sound rumbled in its throat. It had expected fear, flight. It had not expected this small, fragile creature to move toward the source of its own terror. "Malachi," Anya said, her voice a trembling whisper, yet it carried in the tense silence of the room. "I am here. I am not leaving you." The beast let out a warning snarl, revealing a maw filled with teeth like obsidian shards. It took another stalking step, its burning eyes narrowed. It was a pure engine of the curse's destructive will, and that will was screaming at it to tear apart the one thing that threatened its dominion over its host. Anya knew that touching him now would be suicide. Her gentle, soothing gift would be no match for this cataclysm of dark magic. But her power was not just in her hands. It was in her heart. It was the empathy that allowed her to see the man inside the monster. She took another step forward, her hands held open at her sides in a gesture of peace. "I see you, Malachi," she said, her voice growing stronger, clearer. "I see your pain. I am not afraid of it. I am not afraid of you." The beast flinched as if struck. Her words were a foreign concept to the ancient curse, a language of acceptance it could not comprehend. It fed on fear, on loathing, on the self-hatred Malachi had harbored for his condition his entire life. Her compassion was like acid to it. It let out a frustrated roar and swiped a clawed hand at a nearby table, sending it splintering into 1,000 pieces against the far wall. The display of violence was meant to terrify her into submission, to make her run. But Anya held her ground. Her heart was a wild drum in her chest, but her resolve was a pillar of iron. This was her purpose, not just to soothe his symptoms, but to face the disease itself. "You have carried this alone for too long," she continued, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "You are not a monster. You are a king. You are a good man, trapped in a cage of pain. But you are not alone anymore." She risked another step, closing the distance until only a few feet separated them. She could feel the heat radiating from the creature's shadowy form, could smell the scent of ozone and old blood. The beast was confused. It was being starved of the fear it needed. It looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, one of its burning eyes flickered, the ember of rage momentarily dimming to be replaced by the pale, icy gray of the king's true gaze. It was him. He was fighting from within, drawing strength from her words. Seeing that flicker of hope, Anya poured all of her emotion, all of her burgeoning love for the man he was, into her next words. "I choose you, Malachi. Not the king, not the curse. You. I am not leaving." With that final declaration, she did the bravest thing she had ever done in her life. She closed the last few feet of distance, stood before the towering, monstrous form, and reached out her hands. She did not try to touch its shadowy skin. Instead, she placed her palms flat against its chest, a place where she knew his heart would be. She closed her eyes and did not try to push her healing warmth into him. Instead, she opened herself up and accepted his pain into herself. It was an agony beyond description, a searing, soul-shredding torment that threatened to annihilate her. But she did not fight it. She held it, just for a moment, sharing his burden. In that instant of shared suffering, the mate bond that had been simmering between them, the bond he had been resisting to protect her, snapped into place with the force of a supernova. It was no longer a pull. It was a perfect, unbreakable connection. The shadow beast screamed, a sound of both agony and release. The dark, coiling tendrils of its form began to unravel, the malevolent red light in its scars flickering and dying. The shadows dissolved like smoke in the wind, flowing away from him, unable to hold their form against the combined power of her acceptance and the newly forged mate bond. Malachi collapsed to the floor, his monstrous form receding until he was himself again, naked, gasping, and horribly vulnerable. The glowing scars faded back to their usual silver. The transformation, which usually took hours of torment to recede from, had been broken in minutes. He lay on the cold stone, shaking with the aftershocks, and looked up at her. She was pale and trembling, drained from the ordeal, but she was standing. She had faced his darkest self and had not run. She had walked into the heart of his hell and called him home. "Anya," he breathed, his voice raw. He reached out a hand, no longer trembling, and she took it, sinking to her knees beside him. "I told you," she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You are not alone." He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound reverence. The curse was not gone. He could still feel its dormant roots deep within him, but its power was broken. Its hold over him had been shattered. She had not cured him with a simple touch. She had saved him with her absolute, unconditional love, and in that moment, he knew he would burn the world to the ground to keep her safe. He would not hide her, or himself, any longer. She was not his weakness. She was his salvation, and she would be his queen. The dawn that followed the blood moon felt like the first day of a new world. Malachi, though physically exhausted, felt a lightness he had not experienced since childhood. The constant grinding pain that had been the soundtrack to his life was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet stillness. The curse was still there, a dormant seed in his soul, but it was sleeping, silenced by the power of Anya's acceptance and the strength of their new bond. He had spent the remainder of the night holding her as she slept, her small form curled against his side. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, marveling at her courage, her strength. This small, quiet Omega, dismissed and abused by everyone, possessed a power greater than any alpha warrior, a power that had saved his soul. He knew what he had to do. There could be no more hiding, no more secrets. The court had to know. The kingdom had to know. She would not be his shadow, his pet, his secret remedy. She would be his equal, his partner, his queen. That morning he called a full assembly of the court. He sat upon his iron throne, not as a remote, fearsome monarch, but as a man settled in his own skin for the first time. And beside him, on a smaller but equally dignified chair he had ordered brought, sat Anya. She was dressed not in her usual gray, but in a simple gown of deep forest green that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her hand rested in his, their fingers intertwined on the arm of his throne. The sight sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Lord Garrick stood at the forefront, his face a mask of disbelief that was quickly hardening into pure fury. Isolde and Seraphina were there as well, summoned back to the capital by a royal decree Anya knew nothing about. Isolde looked apoplectic, while Seraphina simply looked sad. "Members of my court," Malachi began, his voice clear and strong, resonating with a new, calm authority. "For too long I have ruled from the shadows, burdened by a curse that has afflicted my bloodline for generations. This curse has been a source of pain, isolation, and fear, both for me and for you." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. "That era is over. Last night, under the blood moon, the curse's hold on me was broken. Not by magic, not by medicine, but by a strength our people have long undervalued. The strength of courage, of empathy, and of acceptance." He squeezed Anya's hand, turning his gaze to her. The look that passed between them was so full of love and reverence that it silenced the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the crowd. This woman, Anya of the fallen house of Silverwood, faced the very heart of my darkness and did not flinch. She stood her ground when any warrior would have fled. "She is my mate," he declared, the words ringing with finality. "She is my salvation, and she will be your queen." The proclamation was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by an explosion of noise. Some gasped, some cheered, but many, led by Garrick's faction, looked mutinous. "This is madness!" Garrick shouted, stepping forward, his face flushed with rage. "Your Majesty, you are overwrought. This Omega has clearly bewitched you with some low magic. She cannot be queen. She is wolfless, barren, from a disgraced line. The law forbids such a union. It will destabilize the entire kingdom." "The only one destabilizing my kingdom is you, uncle," Malachi said, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft growl. He stood, pulling Anya gently to her feet beside him. He did not release her hand. "I have tolerated your ambition and your narrow-minded counsel for too long. Anya's bloodline is irrelevant. Her strength is in her soul, a strength you could never comprehend." "It is an outrage," Garrick spat, his control finally snapping. "We will not be ruled by a weak, pathetic creature and her broken king. You are unfit. The curse has addled your mind." Garrick's words were a declaration of treason, and he knew it. It was a final, desperate gamble. He had allies in the room, hard-line traditionalists who believed as he did. He hoped to incite a rebellion, to depose Malachi and seize power for himself. Several guards loyal to him shifted, their hands moving to the hilts of their swords. But before Malachi could give the order to arrest him, a new, unexpected threat emerged. From the shadows at the edge of the hall, assassins moved. They were not court guards. They were cloaked figures, their faces hidden, their blades coated with a dark, viscous poison. They were not a part of Garrick's clumsy coup. They were professionals. And they were not moving toward the king. They were moving toward Anya. Darian, the king's loyal beta, shouted a warning and drew his sword, intercepting the first two. But there were more, a half-dozen of them, emerging from all sides. It was a coordinated, deadly trap. Garrick's treasonous outburst had been the perfect distraction. Malachi reacted instantly, shoving Anya behind him, his body a shield. He drew his own blade, his calm demeanor replaced by the cold, lethal fury of a king defending his mate. He was a whirlwind of black leather and steel, cutting down an assassin who got too close. But they were relentless, single-minded in their purpose. They ignored the king, their only goal the woman behind him. Two of them slipped past his guard. One lunged for Anya. She cried out, stumbling backward. There was no time to think, no time to run. The poisoned dagger arced through the air, aimed directly at her heart. Time seemed to warp, the moment stretching into an eternity. Anya saw the glint of the poisoned steel, the fanaticism in the assassin's eyes behind his mask. She saw Malachi's face, contorted in a mask of primal fury and terror, as he realized he would be too late. This was it. After everything, after surviving the beast, she would die by a simple blade. But as the dagger plunged toward her, Malachi made a choice. It was not a choice born of strategy or reason, but of pure, unadulterated instinct. The instinct of a male to protect his mate at any cost. He roared, a sound that was not entirely human, and threw himself in front of her. He did not try to block the blade with his sword. He took the blow himself. The poisoned dagger sank deep into his shoulder. Anya screamed. The assassin's eyes widened in shock, not expecting the king to sacrifice himself so readily. Before he could pull the blade free, Malachi's hand shot out, grabbing the man by the throat. With a single brutal twist, he snapped the assassin's neck. Malachi staggered back, his hand going to the hilt of the dagger buried in his shoulder. A dark, ugly stain was already spreading across the black leather of his tunic. The poison was fast-acting, magically potent. His face went pale, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his brow. The calm he had known for mere hours was being ripped away by a new, artificial fire in his veins. "Malachi!" Anya cried, rushing to his side, her hands hovering over his wound, unsure of how to help. The remaining assassins, their primary target shielded and their surprise lost, were quickly cut down by Darian and the loyal royal guard. Garrick, seeing his moment of rebellion collapse into a bloody failure, was seized and forced to his knees. But Anya had eyes only for Malachi. He swayed on his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's a potent poison," he gritted out, his legendary strength beginning to fail him. "Meant for an alpha." "Get the healers!" Darian bellowed. "No!" Malachi gasped, shaking his head. "No time. This venom, it attacks the spirit. It strengthens the curse." As he spoke, Anya could feel it. The dormant beast within him was stirring, awakened and fed by the magical poison. The silver scars on his face began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The tremors were returning, racking his powerful frame. The poison was not just killing him, it was attempting to unleash the monster at full force, to turn him into an uncontrollable weapon in the heart of his own court. He was going to transform, here, now, in front of everyone. Panic and fear rippled through the court. The nobles began to back away, their faces pale with terror. They were about to witness the truth of the legends firsthand. Malachi looked at Anya, his eyes filled with agony and despair. "Anya, run," he pleaded, his voice a strangled whisper. He was fighting it, fighting the transformation with every ounce of his will, but the poison was too strong. But Anya was not the same frightened girl who had stumbled at his feet. She had faced this beast before. She had saved him once, and she would save him again. "No," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. "Look at me, Malachi. Breathe. I am here. You are not alone. You are stronger than this." She pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. She did not try to heal the wound or fight the poison. She focused all her energy, all her love, all the power of their newly forged bond on his soul. She became an anchor in the raging storm of the poison and the curse. She pictured his true self, the strong, noble king, and held that image in her mind like a shield. "You are my king," she whispered, her words for him alone. "You are my mate. You are the man I love. Do not let them take you from me." The shadowy tendrils that had begun to snake across his skin faltered. The glow in his scars flickered. He groaned, his body convulsing, caught in a terrible war between the poison, the curse, and Anya's unwavering faith. The court watched, breathless. They saw their king on the brink of becoming a monster, and the small Omega who refused to let him fall. They saw her hands on his face, her forehead pressed to his, her quiet, unshakable strength holding back the tide of darkness. Slowly, miraculously, the transformation began to recede. The shadows withdrew, the glow in his scars faded. The violent tremors lessened, though he was still pale and weak from the poison. He had won. They had won. He collapsed against her, his full weight supported by her small frame. He was alive. He was himself. Anya held him, her heart overflowing. She had not only saved his life, she had proven him right. In front of the entire world, her useless Omega power, the power of love and empathy, had triumphed where brute strength would have failed. It had saved their king. Darian was at their side in an instant, helping to support Malachi. "The poison is still in him," he said urgently. Anya looked at the wound, at the black veins spreading from it. Her anchoring power had stopped the transformation, but it could not fight the venom itself. But now that the immediate danger was past, she knew what to do. "Lay him down," she commanded. She knelt beside him, took a deep breath, and placed her hand directly over the poisoned wound. This time she did not just soothe, she pushed. She poured her life essence, her warmth, her light, into the wound, targeting the foreign magic of the poison. It was a searing, draining effort. She felt her own energy depleting at an alarming rate, but she did not stop. Under her hand, the black veins began to recede. The ugly, inflamed flesh around the dagger began to calm. With a final, agonizing push, she forced the last of the poison's magic out of his system. She slumped backward, dizzy and spent, as Darian carefully removed the now clean dagger. The wound was still there, but the mortal threat was gone. Anya had saved him twice in the space of 5 minutes. First his soul, then his life. A stunned silence held the throne room captive. Then, one of the older nobles, a grizzled old alpha who had been a staunch traditionalist, stepped forward. He went down on one knee, bowed his head and said, his voice thick with emotion, "My queen." One by one the others followed. They knelt before the Omega girl who had just saved their king, their kingdom. They knelt before her courage, her power, her love. Isolde watched, her face ashen, her world crumbled to dust. Serafina watched with tears in her eyes, tears of pride and relief for the stepsister she had always known was special. Anya, exhausted but triumphant, looked at the sea of bowing heads, then at the face of the man she loved, who was already beginning to stir. She was no longer a shadow, no longer a disgrace. She was a savior. She was their queen. In the aftermath, justice was swift. Lord Garrick, exposed as a traitor and a fool, confessed everything. The assassins were not his. They were hired by a rival kingdom, one that had hoped to throw the North into chaos by murdering the king's chosen mate and triggering his monstrous transformation. Garrick's treasonous outburst was simply an opportunistic and ultimately fatal mistake. He was executed for his crimes before the sun set. Isolde, stripped of her titles and lands for her years of cruelty and her public complicity in Garrick's ambitions, was exiled, sent to a remote convent in the frozen wastes. Serafina, who had rushed to Anya's side the moment the fighting stopped, was cleared of any wrongdoing. She tearfully begged Anya's forgiveness for her passive acceptance of their stepmother's abuse. Anya, seeing only the sister who had shown her small kindnesses, forgave her instantly. Serafina chose to leave the capital, to find her own path away from the machinations of the court, a decision Anya respected and supported. Malachi recovered quickly, the last vestiges of the poison purged by the royal healers. But the true healing had already been done. The events in the throne room had cemented his and Anya's place as the undisputed rulers of the kingdom. The court, having witnessed her power firsthand, now looked upon her with a mixture of awe and reverence. The whispers about the Omega Witch had been replaced by tales of Anya the Steadfast, the Luna Queen, whose heart was as strong as any alpha's claws. A week later, Malachi and Anya stood on the high balcony of the Shadow Spire, looking out over the capital as the sun set. The city lights twinkled below like a field of fallen stars. "They love you," Malachi said, his voice a soft rumble. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "They love you," she corrected gently, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "They finally see the king you truly are, not the monster they feared." "That is because of you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You taught me how to see him too." He turned her in his arms to face him. The last rays of sunset caught the silver of his scars, but they no longer looked like marks of damage. They were simply a part of him, a map of the battles he had survived. "I asked you to be my queen in a moment of crisis and declaration," he said, his gray eyes soft and serious. "Now I ask you in peace, with my whole heart. Anya of House Silverwood, will you be my wife, my mate, my partner in all things? Will you rule this kingdom by my side?" Tears of joy welled in her eyes. "There is nothing I want more." He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. He lowered his head and, in a ritual as old as their people, gently bared her neck. She tilted her head, giving him access, her trust absolute. With a tenderness that belied the sharpness of his teeth, he sank his canines into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, sealing their bond, marking her as his for all eternity. A wave of warmth, power, and pure, unadulterated love washed through Anya. The faint, sleeping whisper of her own wolf, long dormant and suppressed, stirred within her. It stretched, awakened by the magic of the mating bond, and for the first time in her life, she felt its presence, whole and strong, a silver shadow mirroring the dark one of her mate. She was not wolfless. She had just been waiting for him. As he withdrew, he looked at her, his eyes glowing with the golden light of his wolf. "My queen," he breathed. "My king," she answered, her own eyes shimmering with a silver light he had never seen before. Their union heralded a new age. The rigid, brutal hierarchy of the past began to crumble, replaced by a culture that valued not just physical strength, but the strength of character, of empathy, of heart. Omegas were given new rights and new respect. The Shadow Spire, once a symbol of fear and isolation, became a beacon of hope and progress under the rule of the scarred king and his steadfast queen. 1 year later, the gardens of the Shadow Spire were in full, vibrant bloom. What had once been a bleak stone courtyard was now a lush sanctuary filled with moon-petal flowers and silverleaf trees, a project Anya had personally overseen. The fortress no longer felt like a scar on the mountain, but its living, beating heart. Anya sat on a stone bench, a leather-bound book of old stories open in her lap, though she was not reading. Her attention was on the small bundle cradled in her arms. Her son, barely 3 months old, had his father's dark hair and, when he opened his eyes, her own calm, observant gaze. He was a perfect blend of them both, a symbol of their new, healed dynasty. The curse that had plagued the royal bloodline for centuries had found its end in him. The healers had confirmed he was completely free of its taint. A heavy, familiar arm draped around her shoulders. Malachi sat beside her, leaning in to press a kiss to the top of their son's head. He looked younger, the harsh lines of his face softened by happiness and peace. He was a beloved king, respected not for the fear he once commanded, but for the wisdom and compassion he now showed, guided by his queen. "What story are you telling him today?" Malachi asked, his voice a low, contented murmur. "The one about the Shadow King and the Omega girl who taught him how to see in the dark," she replied, smiling up at him. He chuckled, the sound warm and easy. "That is my favorite one." He looked from his son to his wife, his heart full to bursting. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by shadows, convinced he was doomed to a life of pain and solitude. But this small, resilient woman had walked into his darkness and shown him the dawn. She had not been pushed into his life by accident. Fate had placed her at his feet, knowing she was the only one who could heal his shattered soul. Their son made a small, happy gurgle in his sleep, his tiny hand wrapping around Malachi's finger. In the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the life they had nurtured, the king and queen held their son, their future, their love a quiet, unshakable force that had remade their world. The story of the Shadow King was over. The story of their family was just beginning.